In 2010, a reality TV show about people buying abandoned storage units became a phenomenon. Millions tuned in to watch ordinary people hunt for hidden treasures in locked boxes. But behind the cameras, the lives of these stars spiraled in ways nobody expected. Some became millionaires. Others lost everything. A few disappeared entirely. This is the real story of what happened to the people who made Storage Wars famous, and why their lives took such dark and unexpected turns. Storage Wars premiered on A&E in December 2010. Nobody thought it would work. A show about buying random storage units? It sounded boring. But something magical happened. Viewers became obsessed. They tuned in week after week to watch strangers bid on mystery boxes, hoping to find treasures worth thousands of dollars. The auctioneer would open the unit. The cast would inspect it for exactly 5 minutes. Then they'd bid blind, sometimes spending thousands on a unit that might contain nothing but garbage. The genius was simple: tension. Every unit was a gamble. Every bid was a risk. Viewers at home played along, trying to guess what was inside before the cast did. Tapped into something primal. The thrill of the unknown. The possibility of instant wealth. By Season 2, Storage Wars was A&E's highest-rated show. By Season 3, it was a cultural phenomenon. The cast became celebrities overnight. People recognized them at grocery stores. Kids asked for autographs. They got sponsorship deals, merchandise, speaking engagements. One cast member would eventually make millions. But success came with a price nobody anticipated. The show's magic depended on one thing. The cast had to be real, authentic, unpredictable. They couldn't be actors reading scripts. They had to be actual treasure hunters with real money on the line, real emotions, real stakes. A&E knew this, so they kept the cameras rolling, even when things got uncomfortable. Even when lives started falling apart. Because that's what made great television. But here's what most viewers never realized. The show's success destroyed some of these people. The fame, the money, the pressure, the constant cameras. It changed them in fundamental ways. Some became addicted to the lifestyle. Others couldn't handle the attention. A few made terrible decisions that haunted them for years. This is where the real story begins. Barry Weiss was the show's breakout star. He was different from the other cast members. While Daryl Sheets and Brandi Passante played it safe with calculated bids, Barry threw caution to the wind. He'd spend $5,000 on a unit without hesitation. He'd laugh at losses that would bankrupt normal people. He wore leather jackets and vintage rings. He drove expensive cars. He embodied the fantasy that Storage Wars sold. That one lucky bid could change your life forever. Viewers loved him instantly. Barry had charisma. He had swagger. He treated storage auctions like a game, and somehow he often won. His confidence was magnetic. People tuned in specifically to watch Barry, to see if his reckless gambling would pay off or finally catch up with him. Behind the scenes, Barry was already wealthy. He'd made his fortune in the silk and fabric business before the show started. Storage Wars wasn't about money for him. It was about the thrill, the hunt, the adrenaline. He had the bankroll to take risks nobody else could afford. And for 5 seasons, his gambles paid off spectacularly. But success changed something in him. Barry became convinced he was invincible. He started bidding even more aggressively. He expanded beyond storage units into other auctions and investments. Friends noticed he was taking more and more risks, chasing bigger and bigger wins. The adrenaline junkie who made great television was becoming something darker. A man addicted to the high of gambling, unable to stop even when warning signs appeared. In 2014, Barry left Storage Wars to pursue other projects. He started appearing on spin-off shows. He invested in businesses. He kept bidding on storage units independently. But without the structure of the show, without producers managing his time, something shifted. The thrill-seeking that made him famous was consuming him. What nobody knew at the time was that Barry's departure marked the beginning of a troubling pattern. One by one, the show's stars would face unexpected crises. Legal problems, financial collapse, personal tragedy, or complete disappearances. Barry's story was just the first domino to fall. Daryl Sheets was Storage Wars' dark horse. He wasn't flashy like Barry. He was calculated, methodical, almost robotic in his approach. Darrell studied storage units like a scientist. He looked for patterns. He understood the psychology of the people who abandoned their belongings. He knew what items held value. While other bidders made emotional decisions, Darrell made mathematical ones. This strategy worked. Darrell became the show's most consistent winner. Season after season, he'd walk away with incredible finds. A painting worth $100,000. Vintage collectibles. Rare memorabilia. He had an almost supernatural ability to spot treasure where others saw trash. Viewers called him the locator. He was the real deal, a man who actually understood the business of storage auctions. But Darrell had a secret that few people knew about. Behind his calm demeanor and consistent wins, he was operating in a world of extreme financial pressure. He had massive debts. He owed money to multiple people. Some of these debts were questionable, tied to people and situations that made even hardened storage hunters nervous. Storage Wars wasn't just entertainment for Darrell. It was survival. The pressure intensified as the show grew more popular. Producers pushed for bigger finds, more drama, higher stakes. Darrell responded by taking more dangerous risks. He started bidding on units in rougher neighborhoods. He began dealing with shadier characters. He pushed deeper into the underbelly of the storage auction world, a place where not everyone plays by legal rules. Then came the incident nobody expected. In 2013, Darrell was arrested. The charges were serious. Possession of methamphetamine with intent to sell. This wasn't a minor bust. This was a felony. The man who was supposed to be Storage Wars' moral anchor, its voice of reason, was facing years in prison. The arrest shocked viewers. How could Darrell, the most successful, most respected cast member, end up here? The truth was complicated. Some said he'd been set up. Others claimed he'd fallen into addiction. What was certain was that the pressure of the show, combined with his pre-existing financial troubles, had pushed him toward increasingly desperate decisions. Darrell fought the charges. He claimed innocence. But the legal system moved slowly, and the damage to his reputation was immediate and severe. He disappeared from Storage Wars. His carefully constructed image shattered. The man who seemed to have all the answers suddenly had none. What happened to Darrell after his arrest would become one of the most puzzling chapters in Storage Wars history. A story of redemption, relapse, and questions that remain unanswered to this day. Brandi Passante and Jarrod Schulz were Storage Wars' power couple. They were young, attractive, and hungry. Unlike Barry's reckless gambling or Darrell's cold calculation, Brandi and Jared ran their bidding like a business. They had a plan. They had discipline. They reinvested their profits into their thrift store. Now and then, they seemed to understand something the other cast members didn't: how to actually build wealth from storage auctions. For years, it worked. Brandi and Jared became one of television's most beloved couples. Viewers rooted for them. They watched as the couple opened multiple locations, expanded their brand, and climbed toward genuine financial success. Brandi's personality was infectious. She was funny, self-aware, and real in a way that contrasted with the show's other stars. Jared was the steady hand, the businessman who made sure their success was sustainable. By the mid-2010s, Brandi and Jared seemed to have cracked the code. They weren't just reality TV stars anymore. They were entrepreneurs. Their thrift stores were thriving. They were making millions. They had a daughter. They had a life that looked, from the outside, like the American dream. But in 2021, everything changed. Jared was arrested for being under the influence while driving. Then came more arrests. Then came allegations of domestic violence. The couple, who had presented themselves as a unified team for over a decade, suddenly seemed fractured. Court documents revealed a relationship under tremendous strain. What the cameras hadn't shown, the pressure, the control, the toxicity, was finally spilling into public view. The revelation was shocking because Brandi and Jared had been so careful about their image. They controlled their narrative. They gave interviews where they appeared happy and successful. But behind closed doors, their marriage was deteriorating in ways that would eventually become impossible to hide. Then came the biggest shock. Their thrift stores began closing. One location after another shut down. The business empire they'd spent over a decade building collapsed. Financial problems emerged. Creditors circled. The couple who had seemed so financially stable faced questions about where their money had actually gone. By 2022, Brandy and Jared announced they were separating. The split was messy and public. Court filings revealed fights over assets, custody arrangements, and accusations that painted a very different picture than the one Storage Wars viewers had been watching. The golden couple was no longer golden. And Brandy, once the show's most charismatic star, found herself fighting to rebuild her life and her reputation from scratch. Yusfa Auctions, known simply as Yusfa to Storage Wars fans, was a later addition to the cast. He arrived with infectious energy and genuine enthusiasm for the hunt. Unlike some of the other stars who seemed jaded or cynical, Yusfa approached storage auctions with wonder. He was fascinated by the stories hidden in abandoned units. He cared about the items. He treated bidding like archaeology, not just gambling. Viewers connected with him because he was real. He wasn't performing for the cameras. He wasn't manufactured by producers. Yusfa was a genuine treasure hunter who happened to be on television, not a television personality pretending to be a treasure hunter. His authenticity stood out, especially as the show's other stars faced increasing scrutiny and scandal. But Yusfa's run on Storage Wars was mysteriously short. He appeared for a handful of episodes and then disappeared from the show entirely. No official announcement, no dramatic exit. He just stopped appearing. Fans noticed immediately and flooded social media with questions. What happened to Yusfa? Why did he leave? Would he come back? The lack of explanation fueled speculation. Some fans assumed he'd been fired. Others thought he'd quit voluntarily. A few conspiracy theorists claimed he'd gotten too close to discovering something the producers wanted hidden. The truth, when it eventually emerged, was more complicated and darker than most people expected. Yusfa had encountered serious legal trouble. Details were sparse because he largely stayed out of the public eye, unlike other cast members who fought their battles in the media. But court records showed he'd faced charges that made continuing on the show untenable. NE had to distance itself from him. The network couldn't afford another scandal, another arrest, another headline about one of their stars. What made Yusfa's situation different was how completely he vanished. He didn't do interview tours defending himself. He didn't try to rebrand or make a comeback. He simply withdrew from public life. His social media went quiet. His name stopped appearing in entertainment news. It was as if he'd decided that the best way to move forward was to disappear entirely. To this day, Yusfa remains largely absent from the Storage Wars narrative. Fans occasionally ask about him online, but his story has been largely forgotten, overshadowed by the more dramatic falls of other cast members. Yet his disappearance was perhaps the most telling sign of all. That being on Storage Wars, for some people, led not to fortune but to erasure. Storage Wars presented itself as a fun, harmless show about treasure hunting. But the reality behind the scenes was far darker. The show's success created a unique kind of pressure that most reality TV doesn't produce. Every unit was a financial gamble with real money at stake. Every loss was public humiliation. Every win was scrutinized by millions of viewers. And the producers, knowing this dynamic was ratings gold, actively encouraged more extreme behavior. Cast members began making increasingly reckless decisions, knowing the cameras would be there to capture it. A $10,000 loss that would devastate a normal person became entertainment. A marriage falling apart became plot development. Legal troubles became cliffhangers. A&E wasn't running a documentary about storage auctions. They were running a show that profited from watching people's lives spiral. The addiction factor was real and severe. Storage auctions trigger the same neurological responses as gambling. The uncertainty, the potential for massive payoff, the adrenaline rush. It's designed to be addictive. Cast members who started as casual bidders found themselves unable to stop. They'd bid on units they couldn't afford. They'd take loans to finance their habit. They'd lie to family members about how much money they were actually losing. Some cast members developed substance abuse problems. The stress of maintaining their TV personas, combined with the financial pressures of the show, led several stars to self-medicate. Drugs and alcohol became coping mechanisms. What started as recreational use escalated into dependency. And because they were on television, their struggles were documented, amplified, and turned into entertainment. The show also attracted a darker element. Once storage wars became profitable, certain cast members found themselves targeted by criminals. Thieves wanted to steal their finds. Scammers wanted to con them out of money. People with violent intentions saw them as targets. Several cast members reported being robbed, threatened, or attacked outside of auctions. The show's popularity had made them vulnerable in ways they never anticipated. Perhaps most troubling was how the show's structure enabled exploitation. Newer or more desperate cast members would be manipulated by producers into taking bigger risks. People dealing with financial hardship saw storage wars as their last chance at wealth, making them susceptible to poor decisions. The show profited from their desperation, their hope, their willingness to gamble with money they couldn't afford to lose. By the mid-2010s, it became clear that Storage Wars wasn't just entertainment. For many of its stars, it had become a trap, a glittering cage that promised riches but often delivered ruin. Barry Weiss eventually found his way back to television, but not to Storage Wars. He appeared on spin-off shows and reality programs, still chasing that adrenaline rush he'd discovered on the original series. But friends noticed he'd aged rapidly. The carefree gambler from the early seasons had become something harder, more desperate. In recent years, Barry has largely stepped away from the public eye, focusing on personal projects and attempting to rebuild relationships that the show had damaged. He's still alive, still relatively wealthy, but the man who once seemed invincible now carries the weight of choices made under the glare of cameras. Daryl Sheets' story took an unexpected turn toward redemption. After his arrest and legal battles, he fought back against his demons. He sought treatment. He worked to rebuild his reputation. Against the odds, Darrell managed to recover. Not completely, but enough to reclaim some dignity. He's attempted comebacks on various shows, though he never regained his former prominence. Storage Wars fans who followed his journey saw him as a cautionary tale and, eventually, an example of survival and persistence. Brandi Passante has emerged as perhaps the most resilient of the original cast. After her separation from Jared, she rebuilt her life independently. She continued working in the storage auction business, but on her own terms. She's been candid about her struggles, using her platform to discuss domestic issues and personal growth. Unlike some cast members who tried to hide their problems, Brandi chose visibility and vulnerability. She's written about her experiences and become an unexpected voice for people dealing with similar situations. Her thrift stores have reopened under new management structures. She's not the golden couple's version of Brandi anymore. She's something more authentic, more human. Jarrod Schulz largely disappeared from the public eye. Unlike Brandi, he didn't attempt a major comeback. He's dealt with his legal issues quietly and stepped back from television entirely. What happened to the ambitious young businessman from the early seasons remains largely private, which, for someone who spent over a decade in the spotlight, might be exactly what he needed. Yusfa continues to be the show's ghost. Occasionally, fans discover old clips of him online and share them, keeping his memory alive in Storage Wars lore. But he himself has remained absent from the public conversation, seemingly content to let his brief moment on television fade into obscurity. The cast that remains active on Storage Wars has changed dramatically. New cast members have replaced the originals, and the show continues, but it's never recaptured the magic of those early seasons. The original stars became cautionary tales, proof that sudden fame, easy money, and constant cameras can destroy people just as easily as they can make them. What Storage Wars taught us ultimately wasn't about treasure hunting. It was about how quickly lives can unravel when you put real people into situations designed to exploit their vulnerabilities, amplify their worst instincts, and turn their suffering into entertainment. The show's greatest treasure wasn't hidden in any storage unit. It was the lesson that came at the cost of several people's well-being, that not all fortunes are worth the price they demand.